Because Star Citizen is still in active development, not every ground vehicle announced or sold to players is yet available for use in the game. Whilst this channel regularly reviews in-game ships for their current performance, what about the ground vehicles that are still in the development pipeline? I'm Forrester, and this video will share some thoughts about upcoming ground vehicles that aren't yet available for use in the game. Since these vehicles aren't yet available, these are my thoughts based on the materials published, much of which may change. So this is a little healthy speculation, and please treat it accordingly, and not as a promise of exactly what will be delivered. And some of these vehicles have been in development for many years after being on sale. To some of you that's okay, and to some of you that's not okay. Both perspectives are fine, but this video won't really cover that. We're here to talk about the vehicles today, so that's the primary focus for this one. And it's been discussed before on this channel that ground vehicles add a lot to the game, but also currently represent a somewhat niche use case, and are often very expensive for real world money. There's a separate video that covers those elements, so this will focus purely on the vehicles themselves. So all of that said, we'll race on to the first vehicle up for discussion. And first up is the Tumbril Ranger, a futuristic motorbike. The Tumbril Ranger captures the imagination of many players with its recognisable motorcycle profile, but re-engineered to be more futuristic. And the idea is certainly appealing. It's hard to imagine that many of you watching wouldn't like to try taking this thing for a spin. There are 3 models planned for the Ranger: the CV, which prioritises range and a small cargo capacity, the RC, which prioritises speed and racing prowess, and the TR, which focuses on being combat capable. The Ranger CV has a more utilitarian look to it, with saddlebags at the back supposedly storing 0.375 SCU of cargo, as well as an auxiliary fuel tank for longer ranges. The cargo capacity is supposed to represent 3 mission boxes, which could be strapped to the back. The Ranger RC has an iconic red look to it, but in terms of the component loadout, nothing really stands out from the others. It might be that it has a higher top speed once introduced into the game, but that's not really published yet. The Ranger TR might remind you of something out of a DC film. It adds 2 size 1 weapons to the front of the chopper, with a limited gimbal supposedly providing modest aiming assistance. Interestingly, there's no mention of a shield generator aboard. The Ranger series is set to be very small, at 3.7 meters in length, which could mean it would fit aboard a number of ships, including in very tight spaces. And that's the primary interesting feature of the Ranger series, aside from the very cool looks, as it potentially democratises ground vehicles by opening up more options, like the Avenger Titan, Misc Reliant, or possibly even the C8R Pisces as a carrier. So for players who don't need the biggest ships to have a good time, the Ranger could be a neat way to get around on a planet's surface. Next up is the Origin X1, the sleek, beautiful space bike. If you weren't a fan of the wheels on the Ranger, then the X1 eschews them in favour of hover tech. And the profile of the body is such that it incorporates the pilot into the flow of the bike, which is a neat, unique aesthetic. A little differently to the Ranger, the X1 is expected to feature a shield generator on each variant. The 3 variants are the base model, the X1 Force, and the X1 Velocity. The X1 Force variant incorporates an additional shield generator, supposedly for exploration and touring purposes. Both the X1 Base and X1 Force models incorporate a size 1 weapon on the nose. The X1 Velocity drops that weapon in favour of being more agile and able to travel faster than the other variants. That makes the X1 Velocity the racing variant in the lineup. None of the X1 variants carry cargo. It seems that the Origin designers thought that too gauche for the status symbol that is the X1. Practically, that may make the utility a little more limited when compared to some of the other offerings. But each of the X1 variants looks set to include a fuel intake, which potentially gives them a considerably greater range for players who just want to get out and explore. At a marginally smaller size than the Drake Dragonfly, the X1 is likely to fit in many ships that can carry a Dragonfly or bigger. The X1 is likely to be a space bike for those who care about looks, perhaps similar to the Nox, so a ground vehicle option for the discerning citizen. Next up is the Origin G12, which kind of looks like a stylish moon buggy. The G12 has an internal cabin, so players could sit inside more comfortably without needing a spacesuit. Interestingly, the G12 is also expected to carry a slot for a server blade, which may potentially create the possibility for having AI-managed weaponry available to a single operator. All of the G12 rovers look set to be equipped with a defensive shield generator. There are 3 variants, starting with the G12 base variant, which includes a remote turret and 2 SCU of cargo storage. That remote turret looks set to be armed with 2 size 1 weapons. The G12A combat variant forgets about little size 1 weapons and instead has a missile rack with 8 size 2 missiles, potentially able to engage both ground and airborne vehicles. Supposedly, the G12A also carries countermeasures, which is somewhat unique amongst ground vehicles, as well as adding more armour for additional protection. The third variant is the G12R Racing Edition, which strips out armour and the turret, instead having an EMP for defensive purposes, although knowing what Star Citizen players are like, it would not be too surprising to find players finding different uses for a vehicle with a mobile EMP attached. And as a racing variant, the G12R is also supposedly faster than the other rovers. All of the variants are pitched at being similar in size to the Ursa rover, so fitting in most of the same vehicles that can carry an Ursa. And they're described as being less durable than the Ursa, but more comfortable, which probably appeals to those who subscribe to the Origin design language. And speaking of subscribing, if you're not yet subscribed to this channel and made it this far into the video, you might consider pressing the button so that YouTube shows you similar videos in future. The use case for the G12 could be for those treks across a planet's surface, for those solo players who still want some reasonable combat potential. That's not to say they couldn't bring a friend along too, of course, but whereas that's more of a requirement to use some of the similarly sized rovers in a combat scenario, it may end up being more of an optional feature for the G12. The final vehicle for this video is the freshly announced Tumbril Storm, a futuristic scout tank. Whilst developed by the same manufacturer as the Nova tank, the Storm is supposed to be faster and less heavily armed. Less heavily armed, however, still includes a size 3 weapon on a remote turret, which is still fairly strong for a ground vehicle. The Storm would sit at a size somewhere between the full-size Nova and a much smaller Cyclone, which would make it a more accessible tank, able to fit in more places than the bigger sibling, but still requiring a reasonably sized vehicle bay to cart it around. The Storm looks set to retain the tracks that were popularised with the Nova, but in a more agile format. However, the Storm also seems to be more tailored towards a single seat, losing the multi-crew options from the Nova. For many, the more nimble nature, the more accessible footprint, and the still substantial firepower and protection may make the Storm an easier choice than the Nova for all but the most hardened of combat scenarios. Plus, space tank. Pretty cool, right? Hopefully that's been an interesting exposition on some of the upcoming ground vehicles. If so, you might press that like button to let me know I should make more videos like this. Otherwise, and as always, thank you for watching.